Well, hey, good morning, and I'm here in the middle of the snow, and I'm talking to you about this new class, Module 1. Basically, it's just an overview of what we're going to be covering in our first session here. And it's about the family, of course. That's kind of the nature of this whole course. But it's basically on the issue of the kind of the sanctity of the family. This first time we talk a little bit about that. You know, people have always called the family kind of a sacred institution. You know, if you've ever gone to church at all, they talk about it in church, and they preach about it all the time. And it also comes up in social media and so forth. And of course, you read about people that want to enter into a marriage and be a part of a family. One of the things, though, modernly, there's all kinds of different kinds of families, and in this course we're going to talk about some kind of non-traditional families, if you will, made up by different kinds of people, not just your old traditional family where it's a mother and a father, man and woman, and their children. And so basically we'll be looking at an overview of all the different ways that families are made up. But we'll also be looking at kind of a part of this about the negative side of how families can have a bad influence in terms of children becoming delinquents and then later criminals. One of the things on this is that, you know, in this tradition we've always had, the family has kind of always been a place where you can go to get away from the rat race, you know, have some peace, encouragement. You know, your parents are a source of encouragement, guidance, even teaching, helping you to learn, you know, like your ABCs as a young child, and, you know, all these different things that are basically idyllic. I mean, where you look at it and, oh my, yes, the family, and, you know, looking at Thanksgiving dinner, everybody sitting around the table, all those pictures and that type thing. So that is in stark contrast with some type of situations where the child is basically terrorized by the father or the mother. There's a great book on this. It's A Child Called It. It's a really sad story, but I would recommend it. It's very inexpensive. I've seen copies on it out there for like 25 cents. In fact, I have bought many copies of that just to give to students from time to time. And it's basically how in that particular case the mother was really abusive. And even though of all this abuse and everything, the child was able to escape and join the Air Force and became a very productive citizen and an author and, you know, an expert really in the area of this domestic abuse, as opposed to what we often think of as the domestic tranquility of a family. So, I mean, this is something that's an ongoing problem. It's been going on for many years. In fact, as early as maybe, let's say, 1700, fathers had the right that if a child backtalked or was not productive working on the farm, that the father could just kill the child and just say, well, you know, I'm sorry, but his just behavior was out of control, and so before it became a problem for all of society, I just took him out. I just killed him. In fact, there's a sad story about the singer Marvin Gaye in the past that was killed by his father, and when his father killed him, of course, Marvin Gaye had a drug problem and he was pretty much a mess, but great singer. And the problem was the father said, hey, I brought you into this world, I can take you out. Of course, society didn't quite look at it like that. The father was tried and convicted of murder. So basically, you know, there's many instances of this, but sometimes it's very hidden, quiet, sexual molestation by the father against the children, both boys and girls. Can be seen as somewhat common in some situations, in some cultures. But generally speaking, you know, any time that a parent, you know, violates the child's person in some way, whether it's by physical abuse, mental abuse, or even sexual abuse, then it is outside what we call the norms of society. And when we think about the norms of society, I've got a good example in my opening paragraph here. Let's say that a guy walks into McDonald's and he's got no shirt on, no shoes on. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that under the conventions of our society and even the rules of the health department, he's not allowed to be served. In fact, he'll be told he's got to leave the restaurant. But what if he walks in with nothing on, no pants? Well, in that case, that is clearly a crime. I mean, that is what we call indecent exposure. It is a criminal act. So there are norms and there are norms. There are norms that say, well, you're not going to get any food, but there's other norms that we call crimes. And so just that little snapshot kind of gives you an idea that there can be lots of norms out there, but there's only certain ones that are actually criminal. So basically, I felt like I was being abused when I was a child when my mom said, you've got to eat all your vegetables. Well, as a grown-up adult, I love vegetables. And so that was a good thing. That was not child abuse in any way. On the other hand, though, I've had cases when I was a juvenile referee where a child threw up because they thought the food was bad and it made them sick. And actually, it makes me sick to even think about it, but I've had cases of abusive parents that made that child eat that vomit just to prove a point. And, I think that's a very bad thing. I think there's even, substances like acids and things like that out of your stomach that would be very bad for a child. And so as a result of that kind of testimony, I've taken many a child out of a home for that very kind of behavior. I consider that to be abusive. And that's just one example. I've got many, many, many. I've got another one real quickly I'll go into. I had a case where a child was being raised by the grandparents, and the grandfather went out and literally bought a dildo for his granddaughter because he said he wanted her to experiment with this instead of having sex with boys. Well, here again, I felt like that was going a little bit too far. Maybe it would have been better to just have grandmother explain some of these things instead of going to that far extreme. So to me, I felt that was some form of not necessarily, let's say, child abuse, but it was a very poor decision on his part, which resulted in removing the child from the grandparents and finding another relative, which happened to be an aunt and an uncle, that the young teenage girl went to live with. So these are, you would not believe, I could go on and on about the juvenile stories that I heard when I was working in juvenile court over a long period of years. So a lot of things to consider here, and we've just got to decide, well, is that a violation of a social norm, or is that what we would consider criminal in terms of abusive and, very serious? I think we know very easily what abusive behavior is. Cases where father was having sex with an 8-year-old daughter, for example, clearly violation. But what about when a teenage daughter is laying on the bed asleep in the middle of the summer, the air conditioning's broke or there's no air conditioning, and father comes in and sees her naked asleep while he turns off the fan? I actually had a case like that where the girl woke up, saw her father in her room, and he was just in there shutting off the fan. And, of course, social workers are saying, well, I think, that was child abuse, or, that he was watching her or something like that in a bad way. And I refused to accept that. I was just like, hey, he's trying to take care of the situation. As far as the fan was on, he felt like that too much cold air on a naked body would be bad, so he went in and shut it off. I didn't find that to be out of line, but some people might. I mean, I don't know. That's you've got to call it. But what it really boiled down to in that case was the girl was angry at her dad because her dad wouldn't let her go out and stay all hours of the night out with her 16-year-old boyfriend. She's 14 or 15. And he was trying to look out for her welfare by saying, I don't want you out 1, 2 o'clock in the morning running around with this boy because I'm afraid that you're having some kind of sexual contact with him. And so what ended up happening is I pulled the girl out anyway, just temporarily for about 90 days, and put her with a foster family, which wouldn't allow her to go out with her boyfriend all hours of the day or night either. And so eventually, after about 30, 45 days, she's telling her social worker, I want to go back home. It was nicer back home. It was cleaner. At this place, I don't like it. And, you know, so basically it just all ended up being dismissed eventually. But, you know, those are closer calls, you know, when he does see a teenage daughter undressed, you know. But, you know, I felt the overall circumstances weren't that bad. Now, other cases I've had where guys would, this would be a grown-up adult, maybe 40-year-old stepfather, would climb in the shower with the stepdaughter naked while they were in there naked. And, you know, that was where it was getting pretty smarmy and nasty. And so obviously I pulled the child out of there, and then I just basically told the mother, look, you're going to have to make a choice between your husband and your daughter. And a lot of times they made the right choice. Sometimes they didn't, unfortunately, in my view. So these are the things that we see in a lot of these kind of cases. I'll be using these examples again and again, and I'll be coming up with other ones. Generally speaking, rule of thumb, though, on these kind of cases is Travis Hershey and Gottfredson argue that just about all societies have some basic rules that relate to all kinds of behavior, and that has to do with fraud, you know, taking advantage, unfair advantage of your neighbor, lying, should always be honest. In other words, they're in favor of fair play, honesty, and honor for the rights and needs of other people. My mother, 87 years old, has always said, my rights end where your nose begins. So that's a kind of an easy, simple, common sense way to consider, you know, how the law should work. And so basically when we get into things like fraud, lying, stealing, threatening or harming other people, these are forbidden in just about all societies. And if you look at a society that tends to start acting that way as an overall group, this is kind of a lawless society. Easy current example would be like Nazi Germany, you know, when they started, you know, routinely killing people just because of how they look or what their religious views are or so forth, then that's obviously the whole society is out of control, and they're violating worldwide norms, not just accepted social norms. So our big question is going to be, you know, children often misbehave like in elementary school. But is this a sign of things to come? I had a case, 5-year-old boy stealing milk money out of the milk money jar in like kindergarten. And later on that child ended up in boys' school, jail, and prison actually for many more serious crimes. And largely, I think, more because of neglect than abuse. His mother was a drug addict, alcoholic, and left him alone, his own devices all too often, and he just kind of got in with a bad crowd at a very young age and then engaged in very antisocial behavior, which got progressively worse. So, you know, sometimes kids, though, want something, they'll steal it. I mean, you teach them a lesson, they don't do it again. Sometimes it's just a bad omen of bad things to come. Well, thanks for watching. We'll get back with you with more on this soon, and hope you enjoyed this video.